Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
If you've served in the military, the Alaska VA welcomes you home and thanks you for your service. We encourage you to enroll for the VA healthcare benefits. Apply online in less than 5 minutes. You can also print, fax, or mail the 2-page form to the VA. You do not need your DD-214 to apply.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. It's the 18th of September. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your latest weather happenings in your part of Alaska. You can do that easily with your NOAA Weather Radio, checking online at weather.gov/Alaska, or if you type in Anchorage, Fairbanks, or Juneau after that /, that'll get you a little more localized in your forecast information if you like that. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. You can find information during the day on Twitter, on Facebook from NWS Alaska, or on YouTube. About 4 o'clock you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing. And after this show you'll get the entire show of Alaska Weather, brought to you by our broadcast partner Alaska Public. You can find it on their website, alaskapublic.org, or in the YouTube search bar at the top, just type in AKwx TV. Here's a look at the weather headlines as we see them as of this point this evening. Gales continue for the north and eastern Gulf of Alaska in the offshore zones, and certainly in the coast. That does include Prince William Sound and some of the inner waterways for southeastern Alaska tonight. We'll see how that starts to change a little bit more tomorrow when we check out our marine forecast in a bit. Also around Dahl Point to Wales, the western Aleutians, and the eastern Beaufort Sea also experiencing gales tonight and again tomorrow. Rain continues for south central. It's pushing record-setting levels there, pushing almost, in fact, 2 weeks of rainfall by the time we expect that to end as we get into the mid-weekend period here. So we'll check the surface charts in just a minute. And gusty north winds continue to work over western Alaska. Gusts there today in the 30 and 40 mile an hour range in some places right along the coast, telling us that autumn is surely upon us. Here's a look at the Bering Sea satellite picture, and you'll notice out into the North Pacific a long trail of cloud cover working itself from northeast or southwest to northeast. The next wave of low pressure now is just south of the Kamchatka Peninsula. This is pulling in a lot of warm and wet air and working its way toward the western Aleutians. This will be our next gale for the western chain as we go into tonight and tomorrow. That southerly flow will stiffen up considerably. Meanwhile, those northerlies are coming down the west coast through the Bering Strait and cooling things down. Still talking about rain for most areas there. We're not seeing a precipitation change just yet, but with some warmer air moving in on top of that cold air coming in from the north, we actually saw a little bit of thunder and lightning head across western Alaska today. Just a few strikes from time to time, but a sign of a lot of instability here across south and western Alaska, at least for a little while today. So something kind of curious on this September day. Looking at all of Alaska together, you can see the circulation across the Gulf. This is responsible for gales all the way into Prince William Sound and the northern and eastern Gulf Coast into southeastern Alaska today. It's also producing quite a bit of rain, especially for northern sections of southeast like Haines and Skagway westward. And the rain, once again, lifting northward, will continue to just slop on to south central Alaska with a light onshore flow making it up the slopes of the Chugach and the Talkeetnas. In the Kenai Mountains, it's not maybe a true upslope event, as we would see winds coming up the mountains and cooling off and then condensing the moisture and then raining down upon us. It's just kind of sort of getting up there. So it's a pretty sloppy event, not a huge forcing event that's going to come flying through and then be gone fairly quickly. So what that means to you is if you are looking to do any flying around the region today, tomorrow, into Saturday, conditions aren't going to improve a whole lot, certainly not with any great speed over the next couple days. So again, south central, especially in the Susitna Valley, Things are just kind of slop and yuck out there right now. Now across the lower and middle Yukon Valley, plenty of clouds extending from west to east. Not a whole lot of rainfall falling from that. In fact, you can see some of the drier air earlier this morning that was located on the northern boundary. This is where we were seeing some of those thunderstorms earlier, but still quite a big patch of drier air working its way through the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys and back toward Bristol Bay. A couple patches of some showers earlier today out across Nikolsky and then working back up toward Nunivak Island. In the coastal plain, with east and northeasterly winds, some of those have been fairly gusty too. Visibility has been an issue if you've been flying around Kaktovik out toward Barter Island and Point Barrow. Conditions haven't been horribly great for flying there, but looks like that east and northeasterly wind is going to stay with you, so might need to get used to that too for the next couple days. Here's the frontal boundary position right across the northern and eastern sections of the Gulf. A 974 millibar low is certainly something to notice on the chart. Periods of rain and fog and gusty winds to the south, and just kind of a dreary evening and daytime tomorrow expected for many in south central. Showers and a few thunderstorms have been rotating on the north and western side of this. Those are very few and far between as far as the thunderstorms go, and we don't expect any more of that, but I do expect a better chance for rain as we head through the nighttime hours across the west. Periods of rain will be possible around Kotzebue Sound to the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, probably just making it to Nome. Showers across the mid-Yukon Valley and northward. Don't be surprised to see rain and snow mixed together there for the coastal plain. Not expecting any sizable accumulations, but it does look like you will have an opportunity for frozen precipitation in some places tonight, including Barrow. Out across the Bering Sea coast for the Alaska Peninsula, light rain and fog is expected there. And here's high pressure trying to work its way into the system out across the central Aleutians. This will have the effect of slowing the winds down, but it's also working with that next storm to really pump up some strong southerly flow, and that's what's going to reach Kiska to about Attu later tonight, especially Attu. As we get into Friday, you can see that onshore flow continues for south and eastern Alaska, south central, and a northerly flow crossing Bristol Bay and reaching the Alaska Peninsula with more low clouds and rain. Showers for the interior, some of that probably just north of the Tanana Valley, so probably not a whole lot of a wet weather situation for Fairbanks initially tomorrow, but there will be showers in the region. Low clouds and fog and drizzle back for the coastal plain from Kaktovik all the way out to Wainwright. Probably looking at a better chance for liquid than snow, but it's going to be close. There's cold air just parked right off to the north. So by the afternoon, probably all liquid, but again, it will be coming and going. Out across the west, high pressure sitting south of Adak and Atka, still working that warmer and wetter air northward into the western Bering Sea and the North Pacific. And look, we have another new player here. This is a 999 millibar low south and west of Haida Gwaii. This is trying to work itself northward. The warm air is going to surge northward as we get into Saturday, and with that you can see that warm and wet flow making it into the Dixon entrance. This will represent a new change for the weather pattern for southeast. You'll see that in the marine charts here in a few minutes. Rainfall still patchy across northern sections of southeast to Yakutat and south central. A lot of the rainfall that we'll see around south central will probably subside a little bit more into the afternoon, but it does look like we start out with a wet period, at least early Saturday morning. A trough of low pressure just south of the Brooks Range will probably allow some colder air to drop a little bit further south. You've got a ridge that's trying to hold back some of that cold. It seems to grab a piece and start sending that southward, so we'll see if this organizes anymore. Up across the north, periods of rain and snow across the coast. A little bit better chance for some showers. That's a very low and shallow cold, so you might see a better chance for liquid precipitation as you go a little bit further south into the foothills. Out across the west, 981 millibar low. They're crossing over Attu and Kiska with an occlusion. That's heading for Adak and Atka with that south and southwesterly flow. We still have our ridge across the middle parts of the Bering from St. Matthew to the Pribilofs. Do expect some fog in there, but if any of that can burn off, you'll have a relatively clear position there to fly around, maybe from Nikolsky to Dutch Harbor or out toward the Pribilofs there. So a lot going on around the state on the north side and the south side. Let's see how it affects temperatures today. Mid-50s we're seeing across a good chunk of southeastern Alaska late this afternoon. 60 degrees in Sitka, one of the warmer spots in the region today. 57 around Annette, Ketchikan, 55 in Hyder. Prince William Sound saw temperatures in the mid-50s around Kenai and southward. 50 degrees on the Sterling Highway to 52 in Homer, 55 in Seward. Middleton Island was 54. Valdez about the same there with more wet weather on the way. 48 in Anchorage with only 46 in Talkeetna. As you look out toward Glen Allen, folks there said it was 54 degrees. 63 in Fairbanks. Tanana was 52. Healy was also in the lower 50s. Fort Greely up to 60 this afternoon, 61 around Fort Yukon, 59 degrees around Bettles with Ambler at 55, 43 for AKwx Pass. The Arctic coast from Barrow eastward only in the upper 30s, but with that northerly flow trying to get a little bit of warm air moved around. It's hovering up across the northwestern sections of Kotzebue Sound. Some places there from Wainwright and southward managed to make it into the lower 40s. As you see, Point Hope, Point Lay were a little bit milder still. Kotzebue Sound temperatures, including Shishmaref, was about 54, 52 in Kivalina, 53 for Nome, St. Lawrence Island in the lower 40s. Southwest looking at temps today in the lower to mid 50s with McGrath at 50 degrees. Bristol Bay saw highs in the mid 50s. The Pribilovs still hovering in the lower 50s for now. The Alaska Peninsula was at or above 50 degrees from False Pass and Cold Bay eastward. Sandpoint hovered around 55, 49 degrees out around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, a little bit cooler there, and lower 50s for Attu. Adak and Atka both showed 52. Overnight low temperatures will drop back into the mid 40s for the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. Dillingham and King Salmon expect about 45 degrees, 41 in Nome, Kotzebue, and Shishmaref, as well as Kivalina and Kotzebue Sound region, generally in the upper 30s to lower 40s tonight. The Arctic coast should hold just at 32 degrees, maybe a hair below in a few places, but again, it's going to be right there on that line. So watch for temperatures to maybe swing a degree or two, and then that's when you'll have a better chance for seeing a little bit more of a mix. Temperatures in South Central back in the mid 40s, all the way up to Susitna Valley, in fact, up around Healy, 39 degrees, 45 in Kodiak though. And for Southeast, upper 40s and lower 50s with Sitka, one of the warmer spots. Juneau closer to 50 degrees. Annette, Ketchikan, and places like Craig and Klawock, probably lower 50s. High temperatures tomorrow for the interior will make it into the lower 60s, a sign that rain will not be shutting down your heating process just yet. Unlike what we see in South Central, mid 50s for most places there. Very little change in temperature during the day. 57 degree temp around Kodiak. Upper 50s for Southeast. North of the Brooks Range summits, you can see the cold air effects there in the color at least, with temperatures expected to make it into the mid to upper 30s. And the coldest east through the Beaufort Seacoast, especially Kaktovik only 38. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse likely in the mid 50s. Mid 30s. Kotzebue Sound, expect temps in the mid to upper 40s with Nome just shy of 50 tomorrow. Southwest, you'll end the week with readings back in the mid to upper 50s, about 60 in fact around King Salmon. The Alaska Peninsula probably low to mid 50s with St. Paul around 51. Flying weather shows IFR hovering across the Arctic coast with that easterly flow. Visibility and the ceilings have been pretty poor lately. From Point Barrow westward to Wainwright, we expect a little bit more of a southern extent of that IFR rating. From Cordova eastward toward about Yakutat, expect IFR tomorrow. MVFR through a good patch of southeast, the Alaska Peninsula, the YK Delta into the middle Yukon Valley, and the northern sections of the Seward Peninsula is Kotzebue Sound as well. IFR developing out across the western chain. Here's your past conditions now. AKwx expected to see some improvements during the day. So what you start out with in the morning should gradually move northward, and the lower vis and lower ceiling should lift if you're looking for some clearance through the pass, but you'll still run into IFR conditions likely across some of the northern entrances, maybe later into the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, MVFR conditions there through the day. Rainy Pass, we expect to see at least MVFR. Windy Pass, probably some improvement during your Friday. But Isabel Pass, we expect to see lifting toward VFR as we go through Friday afternoon. Mentasta Pass right now still holding VFR conditions. Have been pretty good all week. Tanita Pass, MVFR conditions should be expected. And Portage Pass looks like it'll be IFR through most of the day with MVFR developing maybe mid to late afternoon. Chilkoot and White Pass may start out with low decks and ceilings, but look for MVFR conditions to develop during the day. Freezing level shows a punch of cold air dropping those freezing levels to about 4,000 feet around Unalaska and Nikolsky, just off the west coast and right over the Bering Strait. In fact, you can see the surface freezing line right here across the Chukchi Sea. Warmer and wetter air is working back into the western Bering. We still have some cold pockets across the interior with levels as low as about 4,000 feet right over places like Healy out toward almost Fairbanks. That'd be right about here. So 4,000 to 6,000 feet you can see. There's going to be some changes here, and out across the eastern Pacific and the eastern Gulf, levels are as high as 8,000 to even 12,000 feet. Icing potential is going to be limited to about 8,000 to 10,000 feet though across South Central. We have seen numerous reports though of light to moderate rime in some cases there, so the icing is certainly present. You'll have to go a little bit lower there to run into that around the north coast, around 6,000 feet and above to get your best chance of occasional moderate. And out across the west, the warm and wet air, you'll have to climb to about 12,000 feet or higher to reach that magical icing point. Jet stream levels show trough of low pressure across the west coast. Of course, that's allowing that door to open and drop cold air across the western Gulf slowly and surely. A ridge of high pressure still in charge across the Yukon and parts of southeast, but it's losing ground, and it's got reinforcing areas of low pressure to back up the current trough sitting across Alaska. At 9,000 feet, we have a weak area of low pressure sitting across south central and the western Alaska range. Southwesterlies coming in pretty strong now to southeast. 65 knots expected to reach the coastline tomorrow. That's at 9,000 feet. A ridge of high pressure there across the central chain all the way into the central and western Bering. That's allowing that northerly flow across the eastern chain as well as the Alaska Peninsula. And the west back into south and westerly flow. Wind speeds there about 30 to 40 knots. Winds across the interior, though, remain pretty light at about 5 to 10 knots with exceptions over the Seward Peninsula. And we're back in that northerly flow there as well. 20 to 25 knots coming down the west. You can see our ridge still in force here. 20 to 30 knots with a stronger southwesterly wind back for Kiska and Attu. We've got winds are a little bit slower at this level across the eastern Gulf, 55 to about 60 knots. That's not a whole lot better, but it is slower. South and westerly flow there. Light winds across Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, and across the interior. Only about 20 knots there over the middle Tanana Valley. Putting it all together, a turbulence, you'll have to go below 6,000 feet to find the worst chop. Let's say occasional moderate at this point for a good chunk of southeast, especially in the morning there. The frontal boundary is washing out, so that focus for really strong winds should be subsiding throughout the day, so the morning should be worst. Watch for more widespread, isolated, moderate and light across a good chunk of southeast and into the eastern Gulf. Some of that could extend into Cordova, at least in the morning hours. South of the Bering Strait from St. Lawrence to Nunivak Island, the Pribilovs into the eastern chain below 6,000 feet, and especially over the eastern Aleutians like Nikolsky and Dutch Harbor in Unalaska, you'll likely find some occasional moderate throughout the day. And out across the west, this is developing, so as those strong winds pick up, we can expect to see a greater swath of occasional moderate for Attu. Most of the interior looks pretty good. Most of the Arctic coast looks pretty good, but again, visibility may be your threat there, and certainly that'll be the case tomorrow for flying weather over south central Alaska. Let's look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with a sea ice update, of course, as we approach the minimum, and take a look at those winds for southeast. Stay with us.
Mars meets his rival.
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We always talk about Mars and Antares and how much they resemble each other. Well, next week, you'll get to see them right next to each other.
That's right, James. And on the night of Monday, September 29th, the waxing crescent moon will form an almost perfectly straight line with these two red celestial wonders. Let's show you.
Okay, we've got our skies set up for just after sunset anytime next week, facing west. Low in the western sky, you'll see the swiftest planet of them all, Mercury, lurking in the glow of the sun. As the days pass next week, you'll see the waxing crescent moon drift by Mercury on its way to a close encounter with the ringed planet Saturn.
On September 26th, a 2-day-old crescent moon will be up and to the left of Mercury. And the following day, September 27th, the moon will be just to the right of the jewel of the solar system, the planet Saturn. Our focus, though, is unavoidably drawn to two reddish lights in the sky. These lights are almost equal in brightness and color. Whatever could they be?
I'm glad you asked. Those would be the red planet Mars, named after the Roman god of war, and its stellar rival, the star Antares. Antares was partially named after the Greek god of war, Ares. Antares is a red supergiant star approximately 600 light years away from us. The reddish color of this star is so striking that it actually rivals the reddish hue of Mars. Every 26 months, Antares and Mars are close enough to each other in the sky that it's sometimes difficult to tell the two apart.
But there's a trick to telling Mars from Antares. Let's show you. Although the planets and stars are objects you can see in the night sky, when their light enters our atmosphere, it behaves differently. When you look at a planet through a telescope, you actually see it as a disk, much like when you look at the moon through a telescope.
Stars, however, are much, much farther away than the planets. Even through a large telescope, they still appear as a tiny pinpoint of light. This tiny pinpoint of light is easily bounced around by the molecules of air in our atmosphere.
So if the air is even a little turbulent on the night you're observing, the stars will appear to shimmer and scintillate. This behavior is what inspired the song,
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are.
Conversely, if you were observing the stars from the moon, which doesn't have an atmosphere, the stars wouldn't twinkle.
Planets, on the other hand, because they're much closer and appear slightly larger than the stars, their light isn't as affected by turbulence in the air, and therefore they don't twinkle, unless they're very close to the horizon. So, to tell Mars and Antares apart, look for the one that isn't twinkling, and that will be the red planet Mars.
If you need a little extra help with finding Mars, the moon can help you on September 29th. All next week, Mars will be just above the star Antares. On the night of September 29th, the waxing crescent moon will be above Mars and its rival Antares, resulting in a nice Mars sandwich.
Think about this as you gaze at Mars and Antares next week. Since antiquity, Mars has been universally associated with gods of war, pestilence, and death. The planets were considered divine, and their peculiar movements were interpreted as messages from the gods expressing their pleasure or displeasure with the doings of mankind.
Every 26 months, when the Earth catches up to Mars, Mars brightens. The brightening of Mars reminded people of this celestial connection to war, and so they came to expect the heavenly unleashing of war, disasters, and death. Even the modern symbol for Mars is still the stylized Roman sword and shield.
Antares, by comparison, represents the heart of Scorpius the Scorpion, and, as its name implies, is hauntingly similar in appearance to Mars. Remember, Antares is a red supergiant star, and it's so large that you can take the entire inner solar system, from Mercury out to the orbit of Mars, and place it comfortably inside Antares with plenty of room to spare.
So get outside and look at both Mars and its rival as they share the sky together.
It's easy to do if you keep looking up.
It's going to be about zero stargazing in southern Alaska and probably coastal West Alaska with the current weather pattern going on. However, if you're up in a clear spot and looking northward, you might get a good chance to see the aurora. There's always a good chance as we get into the autumn and winter months. And if you're on the coast and looking offshore, you're not going to see the sea ice right now, as that is about 120 nautical miles northeast of Point Barrow. We are close. Hard to tell exactly when it happens until things start regrowing, and we can see that on the satellite picture. But right now, we're pretty close to the sea ice minimal extent for the season. That'd be 2013 to 2014, of course. And within a matter of about a week or so, we'll start seeing things freeze up, signaling that all the ice that's here now becomes old ice. Right now, some of this is still new ice. Some of it's left over from last year. But more and more new ice will form, of course, and ice kind of has a birthday there as we round the corner on October 1st, I believe it is. So there you go. There's the ice extent, about 120 nautical miles northeast of Barrow, with that easterly flow working over the north coast. We'll check that forecast in a minute. Let's start in southeast, as we always do. Gales still going in the inner waterways there, and we expect some of that to improve as we go through the daytime tomorrow. Winds should diminish, but you're going to start out a little bit on the stronger side. So look for 40-knot winds in the northern Lynn Canal. Again, that should subside through the day a little bit. 8-foot seas expected, 6 to 7-foot seas at their highest for the central and southern regions. Now offshore, a southwesterly wind coming onto the coast, with seas around 17 to as high as 20 feet, winds generally around 30 knots or so. By Saturday, things improve dramatically. A southerly flow across the Lynn Canal up to 15 knots in the north, 7 to 10-foot sea there in the Dixon entrance, and the ocean entrances themselves around 35 knots. More of a south and southeasterly flow south of Sitka to Craig, 25 to 30 knots with a 14-foot sea outside of the Dixon entrance. And then east and southeasterly winds around Yakutat and outside of Gustavus. Those winds around 15 knots with seas as high as 10 feet. So again, things improving on Saturday. Tomorrow will be a little bit of a rougher start. Variable flow in the Cook Inlet for tomorrow. The wind's not terribly strong moving up to Cook Inlet at this point, but the rain is still coming out of it, so it's just not a real pleasant day. Seas should be about 1 foot or so, so not terribly bad. Westerlies coming over the Barrens and picking up speed as they head into the Gulf and approach low pressure, which is a little bit further out to the east now. 25 knots on the north and western Gulf. Easterlies inside of Prince William Sound, so conditions should improve during the daytime tomorrow. Westerlies crossing Kodiak Island at 20 knots. And things continue to settle down and diminish as we get into Saturday. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound. Seas dropping to 2 feet. Weak southerly flow coming up the Cook Inlet around 10 knots with a 2-foot sea, and light and variable winds through either side of Kenai Peninsula and Shelikof Strait, only looking at 10 knots at best with a 2-foot sea. Southerly still coming into Middleton Island and the northern Gulf at 15 knots. Across the Alaska Peninsula, northwesterlies from 25 to 30 knots on the Bering side, 20 to 30 knots on the Pacific side. Still expecting some higher gusts in the region here with 7 to 8-foot seas for Friday. By Saturday, the winds diminish south and west of Castle Cape to Chignik, 4-foot seas there. Northwesterlies out of Sand Point and King Cove, 6-foot seas there. North and westerly winds still over Bristol Bay at 15 knots, 7-foot seas though north of Cold Bay. On the Bering Sea coast, that northwesterly wind up to 20 knots. Northwesterlies for the central and eastern chain on Friday. Winds anywhere from 15 to 25 knots, 8 to 10-foot seas on the Bering side, 7 to 9-foot seas on the Pacific side. And there's our southerlies developing in the west and west central regions with winds up to 35 knots in Attu. Winds and waves come up even more as we get to Saturday. 15-foot seas there around Kiska to Attu as we head into the afternoon with 10-foot seas over Kiska Saturday. Now for Friday on the west coast, northerlies continue there. 35 knots in the north, 25 knots around the Pribilofs with an 8-foot sea. As you see by Saturday, the winds switch around more to a north and easterly flow and diminish in all areas. 4 to 5-foot seas expected for most of the Bering on Saturday. The north coast, a strong easterly flow with freezing spray, some of that heavy in the offshore areas. 8 to 9-foot seas expected Friday, and northerlies coming into Kotzebue Sound with a 20 to 25 knot wind. That picks up a little bit more on Saturday with 4 to 7-foot seas there south of Cape Lisburne, and easterlies still holding on there from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik 35 knots with a 9-foot sea and the threat of freezing spray not too far away. Recapping tonight's weather, it's just a dreary night and a dreary day tomorrow for a large part of south central and southeast with an onshore flow, a 983 millibar low parked there. Mixed precipitation in the north, a ridge of high pressure across the central chain and a developing gale in the west. Look for a northerly flow coming down the west coast all the way through the weekend with colder air on the way. That's your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.